And welcome to another podcast from the Simplified Consulting team. Today I'm joined by my colleagues, lead consultants Jayne Brown and Dom House, and wealth consultant Chris Lamb. Thank you all for joining me today. 31st of July marks the first anniversary of consumer duties for firms. So, in this podcast edition, we'll hear some insightful views from Dom, Jayne, and Chris on three areas, including have firms transitioned to incorporate consumer duty into their day to day tasks, how consumer duty has impacted their services and products, and if firms are ready for their first board reports. Jayne, if I may come to you first. Question one: have firms transitioned their mindset from delivering consumer duty via projects to embedding a culture within their day-to-day BAU roles and functions?
I think probably we're not quite there yet in terms of transition to BAU, especially in terms of my experience and what I've seen with firms that I've worked with, or what I've been reading about. I think it's very much a bit of an afterthought still, kind of like, oh, we need to think about that, or we need to think about the customer here. I haven't really seen that being fully embedded. And whether firms in the year have had time to sort of redesign their processes and internal practices to really be truly centered around the customer and driving the best outcomes for them. I don't think we're seeing that yet.
I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's inevitable that consumer duty implementation was going to have a long tail. So obviously there was a focus this time last year about implementing the kind of the main requirements and get ready for that first deadline. There was, across I guess almost all firms, there was going to be activities that carried on beyond that. There was going to need the project team to continue to deliver those activities. We are obviously also looking at the legacy implementation for the end of July this year. So, some of those activities or some of those project teams have carried on beyond the deadline last year. I think there has been some level of transition into BAU. If you look at it from a perspective of, have firms looked at the people requirements? Have firms looked at, some of the process activity that they need to do, touch points with customers, some of the, communications that they put out? I think consumer duty is going to be a journey for a lot of firms. So we shouldn't look at it necessarily as has it been implemented, yes or no? I think the ultimate answer is it has been implemented to a certain extent, but firms need to think about how do they take that on into BAU. Some firms have actually taken the project teams and moved them into a business function because of their understanding of the business and some of the requirements of consumer duty. But there is still, as Jayne said, a lot of work still to do on that.
Great, thank you both. Jayne, if I may come to you again, where do you believe consumer duty has shown the biggest impacts within wealth firms?
Well, I'm going to probably be quite negative again on this one. I think if you look at complaint data that's coming through, I don't think we're really there yet with making positive impacts. I think if you look at the trends for complaints, it's still around customers not being kept informed the way that they would expect, not being engaged, correspondence perhaps that they don't understand. If you look at it from that perspective, I think sorting out the root cause and the outcomes for the customer, I think there's still a lot of work to do. And we've just been around the country, Dom, haven't we, doing the roadshow on complaints, and you've probably got some points to sort of share around that. But I think we really need to get to the bottom of some of the reasons for these complaints and turn them into an opportunity to kind of improve. And hopefully we'll see some of that coming through, but I don't think we're there yet with making a big impact there.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, really, because at the outset of consumer duty, when it came out, a lot of people were critical of consumer duty because actually, if the firm is operating in the right way against the kind of the pre-consumer duty rules, you would expect them to not actually have that much to change. So actually, consumer duty was really to a certain extent about rooting out still the bad practices that existed that shouldn't have existed in the first place. So, I think a lot of firms are looking at it and go, yeah, we're broadly in line with this. I think when you kind of scratch below the surface, though, there's far more that needs to be done. I think you're right, Jayne, in terms of like root cause analysis as an example. I think we've always been quite good at putting things into buckets and saying that goes here, that goes here. That's the reason for all of this. Consumer duty is saying, well, what are you going to do about it?
Mm.
And I don't think that firms are universally signed up to that. They a lot of people know that that's a problem, and I think we had some really good conversations with people in our complaints roadshow that we've just completed about some of the challenges they face. But it's almost, you start going towards consumer duty, and you think that you've got to the yes, we've done that, and then you actually go, well, what about this? So what is consumer duty forcing the firm to now think of a problem in a slightly different way, or thinking about how the customer is impacted by things? And I'm not sure we're at that point yet, but I think we've seen some progress from certain things that should continue going forward.
I suppose it's at least being thought about, isn't it? Like, the thinking's there, but like putting some of those thoughts into practice, it's kind of like a cultural thing as well, isn't it? And embedding that, which takes time.
Yeah, I mean, it's to your point around, is consumer duty an afterthought? Well, to a certain extent, yes, it is, because we've all been in those meetings where we talk about the problem and all of this, and then someone at the end of the meeting will say, well, what about consumer duty?
Yeah.
And actually, it's not really embedded until consumer duty is the first point, and then you go from there. And sometimes the consequences of consumer duty are not necessarily how a firm would traditionally think about a problem. So they've had to, kind of force themselves to think about things in a different way to align with consumer duty, and that doesn't always come naturally.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah, and I mean, Dom, Jayne, you both make really, really valid points there. I think, contrary to some of that, we are starting to still see a real shift in the industry, particularly with some of our clients that we're working with as well. Consumer duty is very much at the forefront of their change initiatives. Obviously, we've come in to support them to ensure it's that more holistic view, and it is more of a deep dive to your point, Dom. But I think if we do look more broadly across our industry, I do feel we're lacking some real consistency. I'll refer back to the FCA's Dear CEO letter back in May, where it was quite an alarming stat that come out, and they stated that in their recent wealth management firm data survey, I think it was around 49% of firms in wealth had not identified any vulnerable clients within their retail client base. And that's despite an earlier report in the Financial Lives survey data showing that almost 47%, so that's almost half of all adults, show one or more characteristics of vulnerability. So to me, it kind of begs the question, how? So potentially anything up to half of your customer base could have a vulnerability of some sort. So how can a firm then say that they're able to deliver the right outcomes under consumer duty and they're doing the right thing by the client? Recently at a TISA conference as well with attendance from the Ombudsman Service, and they're still finding that up to 40% of complaints are in relation to basic customer service issues, and they are finding them in favour of the customer. This is a year on from implementation of round one of consumer duty. So I do think there's an awful long way for firms to go before this is fully embedded and go into that culture thing as well. It's not a project, you're not implementing it, it's not a one and done. It is a behaviour shift going forward.
Yeah.
Great, thanks all. Some really good answers and provocative thoughts there. Next, Dom, if I could come to yourself, what significant changes have firms made to their product offerings to comply with consumer duty?
Well, we have seen a few. I think, Chris, you mentioned the Dear CEO letters that we've had over the last year or so, and I think that's been a really interesting thing that the FCA have done, because I think some people were maybe thinking that Consumer Duty was, a great general principle, and that's going to be all nice, and we'll kind of do what we need to do there, but not take it to its logical conclusion. I think what the FCA have done is actually show that no, this has teeth, and we're going to take this seriously. So, firms have probably looked at that and gone, actually, we need to actually look at some of this stuff in a bit more detail. So we've seen things like exit fees being questioned and taken out by SJP and others. I think that's a really good example of how firms' traditional practices have been questioned, that it's not suitable anymore to put barriers and costs in place to prevent a customer switching products from one place to another. So I think that's been really interesting to see. I think the other point is around the interest on cash balances and the kind of double dipping processes that were in place. I think firms again used to that. They didn't necessarily see that as a problem first up. I think some did and dealt with it, but others didn't. And actually being called out by the FCA and saying, no, this practice isn't suitable anymore, it's not delivering the outcomes that we're expecting, has actually shown firms that actually they need to take some action here. So I can see the logical conclusion of Consumer Duty coming up a bit more now, where firms are more able to question existing practices, more able to go, is this the right thing for the customer? And hopefully we'll see more and more of those kind of practices being questioned and actually ultimately being removed if they're not appropriate.
Great, thanks, Dom. And Chris, to yourself, are boards ready to publish their attestation reports and paint a glowing picture on their firm's adherence to Consumer Duty?
Yeah, good question. And this is time critical now. So simply put, they have to be ready. As we know, the deadline is going to be the 31st of July. This obviously coincides with the date for the legacy product compliance as well. So there's an awful lot going on within firms at the moment at board level for the consumer duty champions as well. But it's going to be so important that these reports are delivered and they're delivered in the right way. Now, my view is I don't think the regulators necessarily looking for an A-star report or a report which shines a gleaming outlook on the firm in terms of how they have performed against the consumer duty regs. What they're looking for is progress. And I think within that as well, it should reflect and update in terms of how the full implementation has gone. It's going to cover things such as what the customer outcomes are looking like now, and also the outcomes of the monitoring results as well. I think the FCA are fully expecting to see issues, and that's a good thing. It means that they are being identified. But it's so important that consumer duty champion is implementing change as a result of these, so they are always driving the right outcomes for that end customer. We know that the board reports will also have to consider things such as a board strategy and how this remains compliant. So if you are undertaking a large transformative initiative, if you are looking to outsource work or anything along those lines, how are you evidencing that that is in the interest of that end customer from a product and servicing perspective as well? And it's not going to be at a detriment to the level of service that they're receiving today. And we touched on this point earlier. I think there is evidence that firms are starting to make good progress. There's definitely more that they still need to do. It will be a huge culture shift, and that needs to be driven from the boardroom into the operations, into the front, middle, and back office teams as well. And that is going to be that's why it's going to be so important that consumer duty is visible to staff, that's visible to staff from a performance perspective. It should be in their objectives, it should be in development plans, and that should directly feed into any reward related conversations that staff are having as well.
Yeah, it's a really good point around that board report, isn't it? That actually a glowing report from a firm, or glowing reports across the board, is actually a bit of a failure of consumer duty, because it would indicate that there's still too much kind of marking your own homework, that we'll come up with the metrics that we're going to be able to hit, and then we'll show how we've hit them. And actually what the FCA need to see is more challenge. So the board need to challenge back and say, are we doing the right thing? Should we go further? Are these the right, measurements that we should look to actually be clear on, are we compliant with consumer duty? Equally, if there's something, if there's a product out there that's not meeting consumer duty, should that product still be on sale? Is there something else that they should do? We shouldn't just have a, yep, that's fine, move on. And I think, for consumer duty, it needs to start from the top at that board level, because if the board level is signed up to it, understand it, and providing that challenge, then it should be, it should trickle down into the rest of the firm and to the culture and the operational teams and whoever else. But the board need to set that kind of that level and set that example for the rest of the firm.
Yeah, I agree. And leaders throughout the business as well will be held to account for some of this stuff. And I think there is an expectation that they are also going to be driving that change throughout all of their teams. At a minute's notice, they should be able to clearly articulate what some of those monitoring results are up to the consumer duty champion and board level. So they should have a real thorough and deep understanding of the changes which are being implemented, how they've been implemented, and what the progress is to any targets which the firm has set.
Excellent, thank you. And that concludes our podcast for today. So thank you to Dom, Jayne and Chris for joining me on this edition. If you'd like to hear more from us at Simplify Consulting, then please do get in contact at simplifyconsulting.co.uk. Here you'll find some of our previous insights on consumer duty, including a blog from one of our wealth consultants, Mike Penny, who shares his views on the additional challenges firms face when trying to get closed products to comply with consumer duty. Thank you.